get up and dash 100 meters and I would eat up the competition. It's just non-existent. I kick my feet up. Thought I was passing till I got blasted.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. In only 3 years, Tony Khan is really becoming a first ballot Hall of Fame delusional motherfucker. You feel me? He is delusional. He's so delusional that I decided to start a Tony Khan shenanigans playlist for all of you to enjoy. It took Vince a while to get a playlist, but Tony Khan didn't take very long at all. So this not only will be a flame segment because people are very mad at Tony Khan, but it will also be one of the inaugural videos for the Tony Khan shenanigans video. So what did Tony Khan do? Well, he took his weekly trip to Busted Open Radio, in which he's given an open forum and no pushback. And he said something that is, quite frankly, ridiculous. He says, quote, "The person I think I get compared to most often, you remind me of this person. I think we're really different people. It's Paul Heyman. I grew up on that ECW stuff. Our products are different. He's a genius, and I'm not trying to compare the mindset at all. I've gotten a lot from a lot of people in the wrestling business without having that official apprenticeship." So that's part of what he said. There's another part that he said that makes me even funnier and even more ridiculous. He says, "The person I think I get compared to most often of you remind me of this person. I think we're really different people, and I haven't talked to him or gotten to see him in a really long time. Is Paul Heyman, not the other Paul," meaning Paul Levesque. This guy, he needs help. All right. There's any similarities between Paul Heyman and Tony Khan stem from Tony Khan being a fan of ECW and just following in Paul Heyman's footsteps. But I have never heard a single solitary soul say that, hey, Tony Khan reminds me a lot of Paul Heyman. I don't think anybody would say that. Despite the fact that I said that twice, let me say it a third time. I don't think anybody would say that. A fourth time, I don't think anybody would say that if they were being serious. There's no serious people who are being the Khan whisperer, getting into this kid's ear and saying, "You know what, Tony? You remind me of a young Paul Heyman." It probably got his eyes all glittering, like, yes, I am a young Paul Heyman. And then you go onto radio and say that dumb shit. Now they're sitting back laughing at you. Come on, man. Who is doing that? Is it Jerry Lynn? Is it Jericho? How many other ECW runaways we got floating around in AEW right now? Who possibly could be saying this kind of stuff? What similarities? Look, I'm not going to say that there's no similarities. There's some. That love of the indie wrestling, the garbage Japanese stuff. Yeah, there's some of that. Some of that's there. But I would never see any. I've seen more people compare him to Dixie Carter because he has a more Dixie Carter-like temperament in terms of being naive, being misled by the talent. He signed Dr. Luther, apparently sight unseen, because he's Jericho's friend. Just about everybody got their friend a foot in AEW because Tony Khan was listening to them. So he's shown that he's at least as naive as Dixie Carter. Thinking that the wrestlers are his friends. He's smoking weed with them and drinking White Claws. He's far more of a Dixie Carter than a Paul Heyman. And that's just being fair. He might be following in Paul Heyman's footsteps as much as he possibly could, trying to trace his steps. But I wouldn't say that he's like Paul. I wouldn't say that at all. And I don't think most intelligent people wouldn't say that either. So this guy he's climbing a rung of delusion that I think is absolutely laughable. But the AEW fan base love the guy. They worship at the golden stool of the billionaire prince, and we're stuck with this. So let's get into the peanut gallery. getting with some of these people, what they think about Tony Khan, comparing himself to Paul Heyman. Let's see here. Somebody says, I once had a 10-minute convo with Paul Heyman. Just me and him. All the things you hear about the man is true. He's like the ultimate coach. You want to run through a wall for him. He pumps you up so much. Paul also has tenure and experience. His words are like gold. Tony Khan, get the fuck out of here. Wow. That's crazy. I'm waiting for the first person to comment on that Tony Khan comments on similarities to Paul Heyman tweet rather than Paul didn't have a rich father. I'm begging for it. Well, he did have a rich father, but he didn't have a billionaire father. That's a difference, you know. Paul's dad was like a rich lawyer in New York. And here's the thing. Somebody says Paul Heyman was a guy that worked for years in the business before finally working his way to the top of a company. He took a band of misfits and garnered the attention of the WWF, who followed suit and ended up buying the company. Well, here's the thing. Now, part of this is true, despite the fact that somebody is trying to whitewash this thing. It's partially true. Paul Heyman did spend a lot of time in WCW as a manager. He was also a photographer for a long time too. And he actually worked for Ty Gordon. You know, he worked under Eddie Graham. He was Eddie Graham's like the co-writer for the early days of Eastern Championship Wrestling before Eddie Graham's drug problem kind of washed him out of the way. So he was working under Todd Gordon after Eddie Graham washed out, and he became the head booker. And it went from there to him eventually buying Todd Gordon out. So yes, Paul Heyman had, you know, a lot of experience, but Paul didn't know shit about money. That was the thing. Paul didn't have the finances. He had a rich daddy, you know, again, lawyer in New York. He didn't have the endless amounts of money that, you know, that Tony Khan has. So let's not compare the two. You know, Heyman had more money than most people. That's how ECW was allowed to survive as long as it did. You know, but he did not have the funds that Tony Khan has. Somebody says, you do realize WWE was secretly financing his company from 97? Yeah, he's talking about Paul. Yeah, that's true. He was secretly. But why do everybody feel like they have to defend Tony Khan? Like, yes, he's being ridiculous. It's okay to just say the guy's being ridiculous, and, you know, he shouldn't say that. Somebody says, I think he's made up that comparison in his head, which is what I literally just said. He's more Mr. Electricity Herb Abrams with more money to blow than Paul Heyman. Somebody says, who is comparing him with Paul Heyman? He's not even Herb Abrams. Wow. Somebody says, he's a genius. That's why as soon as his WWE contract is up, he needs to be contacted to run ROH because it's too much for Tony to run both. And I wish he would realize that. Yeah, I think running one of them is too much. Somebody says he's not even close to Heyman. And somebody responded, because ECW is doing so well in 2022. Am I right? Now, this is a positive. You know, one thing I can say is, look, Paul ran ECW for more than 3 years. But Paul was so unprofessional and he was such a control freak that whenever he started getting hit with rules, like when he wanted to be on network TV and networks are starting to say, we don't want this kind of stuff on our show, Paul overreacted and went on TV and started doing like the network with Cyrus the Virus, you know, Don Callis and all that kind of stuff. So Tony Khan has that leg up on Paul. He hasn't had a meltdown over the network yet. You know, Tony Khan is taking his licks on this network thing. You know, they're getting emails and all kinds of stuff. He's being quiet about it. He's being very professional. But Paul called out a talent in the middle of the ring. Tony Khan hasn't done that yet, but he did call out Big Swole on Twitter. You know, so there's that. But this is going to be an interesting thing. Somebody says, Paul Heyman didn't have a rich father pumping money into his hobby. Paul Heyman actually worked in the business before he got the book. Paul Heyman knows how to book a show. Tony Khan can't say any of those things unless he likes being laughed at for being a liar. Yes, Paul did have a rich daddy, and Paul's rich daddy was helping fund ECW. That is true. I wish these people would learn that. Somebody says, I do see the similarities between Heyman and Khan. Both really care about their fan base and have a passion for what they do as promoters. That's vague, though. That's very vague. And that it really applies to everybody. There's no wrestling promoter who hates his fans. You know, all of them are very loving, and they still have their own personal picadillos, because you're the promoter. You're going to push certain people over others and that kind of stuff. And you may bump heads with the audience on that. For instance, I always give Heyman shit for the fact that Mikey Whipwreck was ECW World Champion, and Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and Too Cold Scorpio and Rob Van Dam, none of those guys were. You know, Mikey Whipwreck. For fuck's sake. Yeah, come on. But, you know, it happens. It happens. Khan better compare himself to Dixie Carter. Not even the blacksmith ghetto can compare himself to the originator of Extreme. He's not even the originator of Extreme. That's the thing about... See, Paul brought a lot of crazy stuff to the United States, but in reality, again, Paul was the co-writer with Eddie Graham. And the original idea for ECW was to have a Memphis of the North. That was the idea. So Ty Gordon, when he took over for, I forget the guy's name, when Tri-State went out of business because he took all the money and ran. Ty Gordon wanted to have a Memphis of the North. So that's the wild brawls, you know, empty arena fights, all that kind of stuff. That's what they wanted to have, and they wanted to bring it to Philadelphia. And that's what Eddie Graham was hired to do. All Paul had to do was stay the course, you know, in terms of his booking. Now, according to Ty Gordon, what the difference was, you know, Paul would, you know, add more death matches, and that stuff would creep up the card as opposed to being a sideshow, which is what Eddie Graham wanted it to be. So, you know, it is. I mean, I keep saying Eddie Graham. I meant Eddie Gilbert. I'm sorry. I said Eddie Graham like 6 times. It's Eddie Gilbert. Hot stuff Eddie Gilbert. That's who I'm talking about now. I knew something was wrong. As I kept saying, I was like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. But I couldn't. It's Eddie Gilbert. Gilbert. Let's see. What an absolute clown Tony Khan is, and the wrestling media gives this nonsense credence. The thing is, he's put on Busted Open, where he can say whatever he wants with no pushback. And then, you know, he says ridiculous shit like this, and he starts trending for all the wrong reasons. And somebody says, who the fuck is comparing him to Paul Heyman? Tony is literally a fucking geek with money. Well, Heyman was probably a fucking geek without money. But I think they both kind of narcissistic control freaks, you know. But again, Heyman had balls, man. Heyman would fight the network. He would go after whoever. You know, Tony Khan is just trying to drive up some tribalism with his silly tweets online, because he knows that's what, you know, Paul would do. That's what Bischoff would do. He's just playing copycat, and he's playing promoter. I haven't seen that much of an original take on wrestling from Tony Khan yet. I haven't seen that much. He mostly just gets out of the way of other guys who wants to do stuff. Somebody says, I just threw up. Tony Khan is a petulant child, one who tries too hard at being a character rather than building a character. That's interesting. So many morons decide to not read the article. Assume TK said he thinks he's Paul Heyman and runs with that narrative in their heads. No, he said fans say that about him. Learn to read. What fans? What fans? I would like for somebody to quote tweet somebody who who would believe that. Somebody says, Paul wasn't coke sniffing addict that molests his wrestlers. Bro, I can see that reaches from a mile away. What? How did we get there? I don't know about that one, bro. I don't know. I definitely think that Tony Khan is doing something. Booger sugar, popping some pills or something. But I would not go that far. That's just me though. Somebody says, I never saw anyone compare Tony Khan to Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman is the best head booker of all time. He built a company and bring it to absolute legendary one that everybody miss. I wouldn't call him the best head booker of all time, considering there's a lot of promoters who had a lot of head bookers who took their company in different directions. He's one of them, though. I can say that. Because I don't think we know what ECW is if Paul hadn't taken over for Eddie Gilbert. I don't think we would even know what ECW was, if we're being honest. That's just being honest, though. See, the thing about compliments like this is let other people come out and say it and make a fool of themselves. Saying it yourself comes off as ridiculously arrogant. Absolutely true, especially when it's not even close to true. That is a fact. When it comes to compliments and all that kind of stuff, man, let the product speak for itself and let other people say it. You can always come across as being, like, I'm okay with people being confident and being cocky and all that kind of stuff. There's an element to it that I do enjoy. You know, if I'm a fan of pro wrestling and I'm a fan of hip hop, there's going to be a level of self-promotion that I'm okay with. But it has to be within reason, you know. Somebody says, Heyman actually has creative talent, but he was bad manager with money. So they have that in common. Wait a minute. I think Tony Khan is probably better with money than he is with creative. All right? Because he actually runs businesses. But his creative is shit. And you can look at the stuff that he's done and tell that the boys mostly did that shit themselves. And you can look at it because people who are not involved, they're not in good storylines. You can tell that the Elite put together that whole Heyman, Page, Kenny Omega thing. They put that together themselves. You know, the Jericho, MJF stuff. You can tell Jericho and MJF put that together themselves. CM Punk, anything he does, he's putting it together himself. But when you look at everybody else who probably isn't booking themselves, they're not going anywhere fast. That's how so many people can come in with so much momentum. 2 months later, you forgot they were even there. Look at Athena, Tony Storm, Malachi Black, Miro. And just again and again, it keeps happening because they aren't booking themselves. Tony Khan is booking them, and he don't know what the fuck he's doing. You know, so he doesn't have any creative talent. He's the shits. But you know, you can't tell the guy that. While Paul is different. You know, Paul, you know, was all about hiding the negatives, making the most out of the talent. And Paul would make a guy who was the absolute shits look like he was so fucking cool. Well, believe it or not, there's people who actually think Balls Mahoney was a talented wrestler. Like, what the fuck, Balls Mahoney? He sucks. You know, peace be upon him. I know he's dead and everything, but he sucked. You know, that's why there's a ton of guys who never made it anywhere outside of ECW. That should tell you a lot about the power of ECW. Somebody says, that's out of context. He said he wasn't comparing himself to Paul as far as booking because he's a genius. He was talking to Dreamer about how he comes out during the show and pumps the crowd up, and he felt that was similar to how Heyman had his finger on the pulse at ECW. What? I don't know about that one. I don't know if I buy that one, dog. I'm gonna have to let that one sit. I'm gonna have to let that one stew for a little bit. I don't know. I don't think I buy that excuse. To be honest, I've been saying for a while that AEW is like ECW without Paul Heyman. So while he is making up the comparison because Tony Khan has 0 on Paul Heyman, it's fair to say Tony Khan is trying to be Paul Heyman. I agree with that last sentence. He is indeed trying to be Paul Heyman. He's trying very, very hard. Since I would disagree, Heyman Hustle was taking loans from the Mafia, loan sharks, whoever else, to keep the doors open at ECW. So no, not the same. Yeah, because Paul didn't have access to the money. You know, Paul didn't have the money. He was always borrowing it. He borrowed it from his dad. He borrowed it from Todd Gordon. He would borrow it from Vince. He would try to, get some lawsuits. He borrowed it from the talent. He borrowed from everybody. So, yeah, his finances was not up to snuff. Absolutely. It was a problem. So I says, I disagree with this 100%. Heyman is a master of the business and has been involved in every part of wrestling, top to bottom. Tony is a mark booker who doesn't understand the whole business. He doesn't even have the experience. Literally, the guy jumped off his couch one day and decided he was going to open a wrestling company and then did it. And because, there was finally a big money player out there, a bunch of guys decided, you know what? Let's do it. And Jericho opened the door. I mean, it's very similar to Dixie Carter when she decided to open up the checkbook and, bring in some talent. It was very much like that, very much like that. So let's continue. Nobody thinks of Tony Khan as Paul Heyman. Never. They are nothing alike. Paul was a revolutionary that built a brand. Tony bought his way into the business. That is true. He did buy his way into the business. That is a fact. Paul did build a brand. That is also a fact. Can't say that was wrong. That's I'll never forget Tony Khan for talking about these bots though, and I'm still looking for proof that all these WWE bots that were down talking Tony Khan. Notice how that went undiscussed. How nobody talks about that anymore. That he supposedly had an independent investigation into the bots that people who hate AEW. What a joke. Somebody says, I just said to Meltzer that Tony reminds me of year 2000 ECW. Man, that's not a compliment. ECW 2000 was pathetic. It was absolutely pathetic because they was losing so much talent and the money wasn't there and it wasn't looking good for them. But it was very bad. I wouldn't even say that AEW was like that. I think they're doing much better than ECW was in 2000. ECW should have gone out of business in 2000, we're being honest. Somebody says, whatever. He should focus on being an original Tony Khan because what has he done is impressive, even if my opinions of the product and how everything came together isn't a positive one. He has achieved a unique spot in the history of the business and should be proud of it. Yes, he spent a lot of money on talent, on buildings, and it actually worked. So he should be proud of that. Here it is, another one. AEW was supposed to get rid of the Carnies in wrestling, yet here we are. Look, wrestling isn't a uniquely Carney business. You're just not going to get rid of the Carnies. You're not. Because the moment you hire somebody who is from the Carney era and you kind of need that institutional knowledge, somebody who actually knows how to run the company, the moment you hire somebody like that, it is going to inject the Carney into the company. And it just is what it is. There's just no way, there's no two ways about it. Somebody made the joke, so he's going to stop paying people soon? And the checks start bouncing. They're going to call me a young Paul Heyman. Because the checks won't stop bouncing. Bouncing like fucking Allen Iverson over that damn basketball. Oh, man. These guys are crazy. Somebody says, unable to manage his roster, unable to pay the talent, crumbling under the pressure, about to jump ship to commentate on WrestleMania 18. Paul, man, I gotta cut Paul some slack, for Christ's sake. He was dealing with drug addicts and weirdos all day, man. If Paul would have had, a quart of the talent that AEW has, if he'd had the money, Paul probably would have been far more competitive if he'd have had the money. But he didn't have the money, so he couldn't hire the talent. He couldn't hire the talent, so he tried to make the most of what he had. And then trying to make the most of what he had, he kept losing money. So that was unfortunate, but it was what it was. It's just a principle of business. He's a clown. Heyman is a genius at covering up a wrestler's fault. Tony is great at highlighting them. The two have nothing in common whatsoever. They have some things in common. I'm not going to say they have nothing in common, but what they do have in common isn't exactly a good thing. Here's another one. That must be people that Khan is paying. There are no parallels creatively. Well, except that they both own or owned a wrestling promotion that was underwritten by their fathers. No, there's some familiarity there, some similarity. With the type of talent. ECW relied a lot on the independent wrestlers in that area, and on people who were upset with WWF and WCW, similar to AEW, relying a lot on people who are upset by WWE to fill up their roster. And so there's some similarities there. I think we should give him a little bit of credit, but I don't think, he doesn't quite make it over the hump in terms of being, the guy who takes chances creatively like Paul did. Paul was willing to go there. Paul was willing to believe and get other people to believe. Tony Khan's just not there. He's just a guy who signs big name talent and then gets out of the way, which is smart to a degree, but also not smart because that's also what Bischoff did, and that was a mistake. Here's a good one. Has it ever occurred to him people may just be kissing his ass, or that it makes him look like a mark even saying it out loud? He doesn't get it. That's the thing. Like, he thinks if he says it, that there's going to be a legion of fans out there protecting him and will defend him. And it is. There are a lot of people out there who are defending him for saying this ridiculous shit. But it's, somebody called him Tony Yayo. Tony Yayo. All right, that that took me completely off base. I'm screwed now. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. Oh man. Tony, there's only one Paul Heyman. Why can't you be the only Tony Khan? You need to relax, sir. Yes, that is true. It can only be one, but it is what it is. Tony Khan is a mark for himself. He proved nothing in the business. Enough of the ass kissing by so many in the industry who try to make him out to be the next Eric Bischoff or Paul Heyman or Vince McMahon or Jim Crockett or Ted Turner, etc., etc. Just shut it for once, Tony. Jim Crockett had money problems. Look, I mean, there's so many times, you know, everybody has their weaknesses. Vince, you know, took his eye off the ball the older he got, you know, because it's just lackadaisical. You just become complacent. That was Vince McMahon's weakness. You know, so many years of success. There's only so many times you can, you know, hit home runs before you start not taking it seriously anymore. So, you know, years of, you know, bad writing and bad shows. It was just complacency. Jim Crockett didn't know how to manage the money for the company, so he was not that much different than Paul Heyman. He spent way too much money. He had millions to spend too because his daddy owned the promotion before he got it. Bischoff, cocky, arrogant, relied a lot on Ted Turner to have his back. When Ted Turner didn't have his back anymore, things went down the shitter. So everybody's got that problem. Dixie Carter, you know, again, very naive, thought that everybody was her friend, didn't really work out, but so everybody's got their weaknesses. Tony Khan has a little bit of all of them. So here's another one. One of the most absurd things I've heard. Tony Khan, I'm sorry, but you're nowhere close to the brilliant mind that is Paul Heyman. You couldn't even build one guy as good as Heyman build Brock Lesnar. Don't even use Brock Lesnar. Use, you know, guys that Paul Heyman actually made. Somebody like Shane Douglas. You know, that's, you know, something that I would compare him to. Where is the Shane Douglas of AEW? You know, there really isn't one. Shane Douglas came to ECW fresh off of being fucked over in the WWF, fresh off being fucked over in WCW. He was frustrated and he found a creative venue where he could, you know, transform himself in ECW. And he was able to get to the top with that. And then had that legendary moment he threw down the NWA heavyweight title. AEW has not had that moment yet, you know. So they don't have that definitive star who was cast out from WWE and made the most of it. They had it kind of with Cody. They got really close, you know, but most everybody else, you know, Moxley or Punk, they left on their own. They weren't guys who were, you know, basically fucked over. Both of them were world champions. They just were doing stuff they didn't like doing. It wasn't a lack of success or a lack of opportunity. It was, personally, I don't like doing this, so I'm going to leave. You know, or, you know, CM Punk being better about other things. So, you know, I'm still looking for like the Taz of AEW. You know, Taz was a guy who's undersized. You know, he was doing that silly Tasmaniac gimmick for a long time. And then Paul kind of helped him mold his persona around, you know, his martial arts background. And that's where we got the miniature badass Taz who was choking out giants and shit. You know, I don't see that in AEW. I don't see that yet. I'm seeing cowboys and butterfly plants. That's what I'm seeing in AEW. That's not good, man. That ain't good. Ain't good. That's not good, bro. That's unfortunate. Somebody says we need to set it up exactly the same way, but Paul Levesque, not Tony Khan, who had no business starting a wrestling company. Only white people like Jeff Jarrett, Billy Corgan, Dixie Carter, Paul Heyman, and Conrad are allowed to run wrestling companies. Wait, what? What? How do we get there? I'm sorry. I don't know how we got there. That's kind of fucked up, bruh. Somebody says, one thing I will give Tony Khan credit for over Paul Heyman, he pays his wrestlers. Heyman owes countless wrestlers money to this day. Other than that, comparing Khan to Heyman in any other way is like that scene from Death Wish 3 where Kersey kills the giggler. Well, do you remember those undercard guys who claimed they didn't get paid in AEW? There was a couple of guys that worked with Rip Rogers who claimed that they didn't get paid for some of the stuff they did in AEW, but that was 2 or 3 years ago, and it was guys who got very quickly shouted down, and nobody really remembers it. Somebody says the best promoters and most creative minds in wrestling are huge fans as well. Tony Khan, Paul Heyman, Paul Levesque, Billy Corgan. He misspelled his name. That's why I read it like it was written. So if we found somebody who compares Tony Khan and Paul Heyman, saying that they're both huge fans, this is interesting. Somebody says Tony Khan is not a wrestling promoter. He is a wrestling fan with money. Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Because he can be both. I think he's a good promoter of AEW. He's really good at, making people believe that his product is really good and that he's doing the best that he possibly can. But we are looking at the talent that he has and say he's underperforming, Looking at the talent that he's got, he's underperforming. Absolutely. Looking at if TNA would have had the roster that AEW has, they would probably be doing so much better, And for a while, TNA had a bang-ass roster, too. They had Main Event Mafia. They had, with Sting and Steiner and Booker T and Angle. And, they had some guys, but they didn't know how to get the most out of it. And now Tony Khan's in the same situation. They got guys. They got talent. He doesn't know how to get the most out of these guys. Just not a focus at all on storytelling, which is a big problem with these dudes. Big problem with these guys. It's unfortunate. Here's another one. Here's an oldie but a goodie. Not really old. It's 6 hours old. Nope, sir. Tony Khan is not Paul Heyman. No. You went too far and the crickets from Tommy Dreamer spoke volumes. That was a ridiculously inflated sense of self-worth comment. You might be on your way, but you can't even tie Paul's shoelaces. Somebody says, I sense a pattern whenever Tony Khan is faced with adversity in wrestling. He acts out in this manner. When Cody made his Mania return, Cody talked about bots. Triple H has Raw ratings improving and talents want to work for him. Now this comparison and report of tampering. Oh yeah, I don't take that whole, contract tampering stuff. I ain't take that shit seriously anyway. It's like, I don't buy that shit. I don't pay that shit no mind. It would be easy for them to figure out who that is and file a lawsuit. They're not going to do it because it probably didn't happen. But I'll be surprised if it did. I'm also not surprised if it did, So, all right. Somebody says, quote, some might have said AEW had an ECW vibe, but we hear that all the time when a non-WWE promotion in the U.S. makes a peep. But Tony Khan equals Heyman, LOL, what a mark. That part is very true. That most people they want to make the company that they work for sound as fun as possible. And they want it to make it sound as interesting as possible because they want more people coming to the program. That's what they want. They want some help. They want to try to lure away people in WWE. So they'll say, oh yes, creative freedom. All of our creative freedom, and we get paid so much more money and all that horse shit. It turns out it doesn't last very long, which is unfortunate. Somebody says, as a businessman, you can make the argument for Tony Khan, but for creative, Paul Heyman is up there with the best, no doubt. They both have strengths and weaknesses. Come on, stop being sensical here. That's not what we come here for. We're not here to hear you make good sense. Somebody says if Heyman had the finances in the 90s that Tony Khan has from his daddy, ECW would have been around longer. More money doesn't make a better promoter. It just means you can keep a second-rate promotion going longer. Ooh-wee. That's a good one. That's a good one. Ooh, that's good. That's good stuff. Now, I don't think that this comment is in relation to the Tony Khan, Paul Heyman thing. But it revolves around ECW and AEW, so I'm going to throw it in here. Dave Meltzer made a tweet. He said, Paul would be in business today if he could do $1 million gates and $7 to $11 million one-night grosses. At worst, AEW is ECW just with 20 times the annual revenue. Now, that's a good point. You know, that's the financials. You can't really argue the financials. But how much of that is because AEW had more money to start with? You know, how much of that is AEW had more money to start with? They had more money to start with. You know, ECW had to do everything from scratch. They didn't have a built-in merchandise machine like AEW did. AEW was able to come in and year one start building together video games. Tony Khan sunk more money into the video game than probably Paul made the entire ECW run. And then the game ain't even come out yet. And they probably sunk like what all that money into the video game. It's not necessarily a fair comparison here. Right? So the idea that, you know, hey, the AEW is just so successful. It's like, you know, being able to, you know, get a guy on the level of Chris Jericho to come wrestle in your company that helps. You know, that helps. Being able to pay the PR firms to get out, you know, articles in Variety and the New York Post and all this kind of stuff, that helps. Having t-shirts that having a team of people who put together merchandise. If you listen to the stories of ECW, especially looking at the documentaries and stuff like that, you had guys designing their own t-shirts in dingy hotels. You had guys carrying boxes of t-shirts. Tommy Dreamer was carrying cash in his pockets because they were selling merchandise over the table like they do at GCW shows. It was nothing like the situation AEW got. AEW started out at a huge advantage of being the property of a billionaire. Of course they had advantages. They got revenue streams that ECW didn't even have. Furthermore, they also have a more friendly television partner. TNN was not down for any of the stuff that AEW was doing on TV. ECW couldn't do half that crap. You know, it couldn't do half of it. So, let's be fair here. You know, starting out with more money helped them quite a bit. Especially in some of the other businesses like AEW Shop and stuff like that. It helped them a lot. It helped them a hell of a lot. So, oh my goodness. Now, why did I start with this Dave Meltzer shit? Look what this fucker just said. MJF would be a bigger pay-per-view draw on top if he headlined tomorrow than RVD. Paul's biggest self-created star would have been in 1999. It's already proven, by the way, not an opinion. Guess what? Which one had the billionaire backer? MJF or Rob Van Dam? Which one had the billionaire behind them? Which one had superstars in their company to work with? MJF got to work with Jon Moxley and CM Punk and Chris Jericho. Who the fuck was Rob Van Dam working with? Jerry Lynn, Balls Mahoney. Now he did have Bam Bam Bigelow, but this wasn't, you know, Bam Bam Bigelow, fresh off of main eventing WrestleMania. But even if that was the case, ECW didn't have the platform that was going to make RVD a draw on that level. Get the fuck out of here. It's such a false equivalence. It's bullshit, man. Oh, that's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's garbage. It's garbage. Real garbage. So, Dave Meltzer continues saying that Tony Khan copies Mid-South, New Japan, Crockett, ECW, WWE, and probably 10 others. It's called learning. But people who don't learn usually fail. That's why I don't really like Paul. I'm glad he blocked me on Twitter. I just happened to see this stumble across my timeline because some people I know who are got some screenshots up. But, it's kind of ridiculous. I don't see the logical booking of Mid-South in AEW. I just don't see that. I don't know where he got that from. But, he's a Tony Khan guy. He's a Tony Khan guy, so I don't know. It seems weird to me that we would go that route. Oh, here's Busted Open is AEW state radio. Tony can say whatever bullshit he wants. Dave and Tommy would just slurp him up. I don't like that. Don't use that kind of imagery. I'm not a fan. Somebody says, I used to listen to Busted Open daily, but once AEW started, Dave became nothing more than a shill for AEW, plus, quite frankly, an AEW kiss ass. He went from never bad-mouthing NXT, saying it was his favorite show, to bitching about its lighting and the match lengths, etc. I don't know, man. Who cares, really? There's no point to even, tripping about this. It's all an opinion show, and yes, opinions will change based off of, other stuff. You just can't take that shit personally. You can try to hold people to standards, and they'll find a way to wiggle free. But we all got a good laugh out of Tony Khan comparing himself to Paul Heyman and it being absolutely ridiculous. But now I have dinner to go make. Thank you guys for listening. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.